I'm going to just jump straight into it today because there's kind of a lot that I want to go over, and I want to make sure I have some time to really do it justice and make sure that we have time to really just run through this in a way that's helpful for us and then also glorifying to God. So I know that you guys, a lot of you probably have already been reading this title. I want you to start just right now trying to think through and process what emotions go through your head when you hear this idea of time running out. I know that for me, a lot of times it's panic or fear. I know when I used to play basketball a lot, if I had the ball at the end of the quarter or the shot clock or at the end of the game, I would panic. I couldn't think straight. I would turn the ball over. I would take a terrible shot. Just because I knew in the back of my mind that time was running out. And so then I didn't know what to do. And I know that in my faith walk, this idea of okay, Jesus came and when he left, he said, hey, I'm coming back. And this idea of okay, every second that passes, we're getting closer to that time. And so then now I know time is running out. Even if it's not soon, I know it's less than what it used to be. We're getting closer to it. And so a lot of times, again, I start to feel that panic or fear of man, I don't know what to do about that. I maybe start to try to work harder for a few days, but then that wears off. Or I am really anxious for a few days, and then I push it out of my mind because I just don't want to think about it. So I want to see if we can just have a beneficial conversation about this, just being able to be okay with the fact that time is running out and that there's supposed to be this alertness and preparedness that we're supposed to have. But before we jump in, I want to just say this off the top. I am not going to predict when it's going to happen. I have no idea when it's going to happen. I'm not going to tell you oh yeah, I had a vision and it's happening on what, it's not going to be any of that. And even in the discussion afterwards, I don't want it to be that we're talking about well, I think it's going to be there's just not anything we need to speculate about with that. But at the same time, Jesus was talking about the fact that we do need to be alert and aware of it. But I also don't want to just not have that conversation maybe because it's wrong or bad, but that part of it is that I think that as the people of God, we're not supposed to be people of conspiracy. As followers of Jesus, we're not supposed to be people that are just jumping onto random conspiracies of, I heard over here that it's going to happen here. Oh, hey, I heard this person, they said that. And jumping onto all these things, it can be really hurtful. One, because it's going to potentially draw people away from Jesus. If you throw some random date out there and then it doesn't happen, they think now that the rest of what you had to say is void. Or it's a lot of times, again, just inciting fear. You're jumping onto all these conspiracies and it can make people really scared of having conversations like this. So I don't want to have any of that. I want to just jump into this parable where Jesus talks about how we can be alert in a healthy way, how we can be alert and aware of the fact that there is the truth that there is less time than there used to be and that time is running out as we keep on living. And just in case there's anyone in the room who doesn't know what I mean by parable, a parable is a fictional story, a made-up story that is used to bring some simplicity to more complex truths in the Bible. So Jesus would use this a lot. Instead of just trying to break it down and just say the truth right off, he would tell a story that would start to kind of paint a picture of what he meant. So tonight I just want to break this down. We're going to go verse by verse, and we're going to break down what Jesus is talking about and how we can be prepared. And this, I want to say before we even jump into the parable, is this idea this in Matthew chapter 24, which is right before the parable that we're going to read. He said, now concerning that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven or the Son, except the Father alone. So again, like I was saying, we're not jumping into any conspiracies and things like that. We're going to stand on the truth of what Jesus said, and if he said that he doesn't even know, then I'm not going to stand up here and act like I know. But we want to be alert. So here's what it says in chapter 25. He tells this story right after he says this. He says, at that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the groom. Okay, so context. In traditional Jewish weddings, the bride and groom would get married, and then the groom would walk his bride up the street, and they would go back to their house. And what the bridesmaids' jobs was, and that's what they're talking about, is 10 bridesmaids. They would go up ahead and they would have these lamps and they would like light the way as the bride and groom went up into their house. And they would like be celebrating with them and like welcoming them home. And then once they got home, if you were one of those bridesmaids, then you got welcomed into the house as the bride and groom got there, and there was a wedding feast that you were welcome to go into. We following that? So then, again, just to give context of what's happening here, the groom is God going and moving through. We're the bridesmaids that are preparing the way, and then once we get to that marriage feast, that's heaven at the end. So that's what Jesus is talking about. We following that? Okay, so then in the next verse it says this. It says, 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were wise. When the foolish took their lamps, again, they're lighting the way. As the foolish took their lamps, they didn't take oil with them. But the wise ones took oil in their flasks with their lamps. Okay, so then now what is the oil? What's the oil representing? The oil is representing God's grace. God's grace is what gives us the power to be able to do things that we couldn't have done before. God's grace is what covers us and saves us from our sin. We following that? And it's also what fuels us, the same as what it did in this. The oil is what would fuel the fire. It's what would keep it going. So then what we see is that there's 5 that were foolish and 5 that were wise. What's the difference between the two? There were some that were alert and prepared, and there were some that weren't. And that preparedness that Jesus is talking about is there's some that accepted God's grace and there's some that did not. There's some that said, you know what, I don't have what it takes to make it all the way until Jesus comes, so I'm going to be continually doing what it takes to be prepared for when it happens. And then there were 5 that said, you know what, I think I got it. Same as if like I was up here and I'm giving this and I'm standing up here in all this pride of like, man, look at all these people who want to come and hear from me. I'm going to show them how great I am and I have a bunch of pride. Like that's a lack of oil in that scenario because I'm relying on myself. Or like when you walk in and you see a friend and you're talking with them and you see that they're living a lifestyle that's like just has a lot of sin and things in it. And then you go, man, I'm glad that I'm not like them. Like, I bet that God loves me way more than they do. And it may not even be that conscious of a thought, but it's there. It's another sign that we have a lack of oil. So we've got to be constantly working through our mind. Where are the places where I lack oil? Where are the places where I'm not allowing God's grace to get in and I'm relying on my own supply? Okay, so that's what the foolish did. They relied on their own supply. And then it says, when the bridegroom delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. It's interesting. It says all of them did. The ones that were prepared and the ones that weren't, they all fell asleep. Now, I used to be really confused by this and be like, well, they said the wise ones. How come they didn't stay awake? Well, let's break this down. Asleep, another word for asleep is unconscious. Conscious, another word for conscious is aware. So if they're unconscious, they're unaware. All 10 were unaware. Like he was talking about in the chapter right before, everyone's unaware. The ones that are prepared and the ones that aren't, all of them are asleep. None of them know when it's going to happen, but there are some that are prepared, and so then we see that breakdown right here. It says, in the middle of the night, there was a shout, here comes the groom, come out and meet him. Then all the virgins got up and trimmed their lamps. They prepared their lamps. And the foolish ones said to the wise ones, give us some of your oil because our lamps are going out. And the wise ones answered, no, there won't be enough for us and for you. So go instead to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves. Okay, so I want to break down what this is talking about. What's happening here is, again, what is the oil? The oil is grace, right? And how do I get that grace? In the presence of God. I'm getting that from spending personal time with God. He's revealing to me more of how much he loves me. He's giving me more power and fuel to be able to change and do new things. So then think like if I got that from a personal relationship with God, like I can't transfer that to you. You see what I mean? Like I can't take that and like give it to you. So that's what they're saying here. They're saying, hey, let's get some of that. And they're like, no, there's not enough for that. Like what was given to me is mine. And I can't transfer that to you. So then what we have to remember is we can't be relying on borrowed oil. We can't be relying on other people, maybe your pastor or your friend or your spouse or your best friend. Like there's all these people that maybe are really have a strong personal relationship with God, and then we go, oh, well, I'm just going to kind of borrow off of theirs. And whenever I have something hard going on, I'm just going to go to them and ask if they'll pray for me and see if God will tell them what I'm supposed to do. Or, oh, maybe I'm just going to go to them and see if they can comfort me. And we start to borrow off of other people's oil. Not that it's not good to rely on people, but it's an unhealthy reliance to the fact that we're actually trying to pull from their supply of their relationship with Jesus. And what we realize here is that at the end, when Jesus comes back, we can't rely on that. It's not enough. But then look what they say at the end. It says, you've got to go to the people who sell it and buy some for yourselves. What would the equivalent of that be? That means like the clouds are parting, the sky is splitting, and Jesus is coming back, and they're saying, hey, if I need oil, now I've got to try and run to God really quick and get some oil. Like, it's too late. I can't do that at that point. It's too late. And we see that here. It says, when they had gone to buy some, the groom arrived, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. You guys remember what I'm talking about. He arrives home. There's 5 of them that have lamps. And so they said, okay, these are the ones that are supposed to come in. You guys are going to come in with me. And they shut the door. Then it says later, the rest of the virgins also came and said, Lord, Lord, open up for us. And he replied, truly, I tell you, I don't know you. The way that he knew them was by their oil. The fact that there were some that had oil, and that's how he was able to recognize them. When he goes back to the door and they don't have it, or they didn't wait before they shut the door, he's like, we must not know who you are. You must have not been invited to the wedding. What's really interesting is that Jesus actually uses this same phrase in Matthew chapter 7. He says, on that day, again, he's talking about the end. He's saying, on that day, they will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, and do many miracles in your name? And then I will answer them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you lawbreakers. Do you guys see how, like, this, I'm telling you, like, this blows my mind every time that I read it. There's people who could be healing people and doing miracles that don't have oil, and the fact that then at the end of time when they're standing before God, he's going, I don't even know who you are. But what's interesting is he actually will still use people's gifts, and he will still use people to accomplish the goal that he needs to happen. So it's not like he's just withholding it from everybody. He'll give gifts to people. And so that's why you'll see sometimes, like, if you maybe see videos or things on social media, or you hear people talk about stuff, you hear people like, this dude's really healing people. Or this dude just did a miracle. Like, I can't believe he just did that. Like, that is not a sign of oil. So then again in that story, like, I just picture like the groom going back to the door. He's like looking through the peepholes, trying to see who's knocking on the door. And there's a bunch of people standing there with lamps. The lamps signify, I can prophesy, I can speak in tongues, I can heal people, I did this miracle. That's the lamp. But it's sitting there with no oil. So he's like, yeah, I don't think I know who you are. So we've got to start to measure that. What are the things that you're doing, and what are you doing them with the power of? Like, I can get up here and talk and maybe say some things that are true about the Bible, but if I'm up here with no oil, it's not going to matter. Or if I'm really good at serving people and I go and do it all the time and I'm feeding people that are hungry and I'm helping people that are hurting, like, I could do that all my whole life and still get to the throne of God and him go, yeah, I don't know you. So in order for that not to happen, we've got to be focused on how can I get oil, and that oil again comes from the presence of God, right? Okay, so here's how he ends it. He goes through that whole story, and then here's what he says. Therefore be alert, because you don't know either the day or the hour. So again, he gives us another example. You're not going to know when it's happening. And if you have oil for a second, and it's like, yes, I'm in his presence, and I'm reading the Bible, and I'm praying all the time, and man, we're close. But then if I get to that and go, okay, but he's probably not going to come back anytime soon. So I'm going to kind of relax on that and go back to some of the things I was doing before. I'm going to go back to this. And all of a sudden I walk away and I run out of oil. When that day comes, now I'm not prepared. There's got to be an alertness of going, you know what? I know it could be any time, so I'm constantly going back to God. Give me more oil, more oil, more oil. So I want to break this down and just give us just some tangible things before we wrap it up. The first thing is, don't take Jesus' return lightly. So like the way that he was talking about being alert, like this is not a suggestion. Like this is not him saying like, hey, like you should be ready, but I mean, if you're not, like it's okay, you can still come in. Like it would be nice if you were, but it's okay. Like that's not what he's saying. He's actually saying like, if you're not alert, like the door is shut and you can't come in. So like this isn't something we can take lightly. We've got to deal with this aggressively and say, okay, not in a state of fear, but in a state of realizing like this is something serious. I've got to really try and take this seriously. And then the second thing is I want to await Jesus' return with hope. So again, like I said at the beginning, I know that when I hear things like this or I hear messages like this, the first thing I do is I panic. I go, oh no, wait, I don't think I have enough oil. I got to run home and try to. That's not the state that Jesus is trying to get people into. The people that were in this story that were wise, they fell asleep. But they had a security in the fact that they had oil, and they were not trying to ask God for oil because I'm scared of what's going to happen if I don't have it. But they were going, no, I actually realized that I'm actually excited for when Jesus comes back. Like I'm looking forward to it, so I want to be prepared for when it happens. Because this life is hard and there's so many struggles and I can hardly make it through the day. So like the hope that I'm leaning on is I'm going, God, I want to be in relationship with you so that I have oil, so that like I'm praying like, God, I want you to come back now. Like I know sometimes especially when I was a kid, I'd be like, oh, just don't come back yet. Like give me just a little bit more time. But it's because, again, I was still relying on my own supply of oil. Like I was still saying like, let me store up a little bit more in my own power and then come back. Then I'll be good. Then you'll come back and I'll be able to show you my supply and go, yep, see, look at all this that I got. But once we realize that oil is not something that we earn, it's not something that we can do on our own, it's something that we get from him as a free gift. Now once I have it, I'm like, yes, okay, come back now. Like I'm ready right now. And we're able to await with hope instead of fear. And again, like Jesus was just a perfect example of this. Like he did it so well. And when you start to read through the Gospels now with this lens, you'll start to see like he was alert and prepared all the way through his ministry. And they're like, he only lived to 33. He knew that he didn't have a ton of time. And his ministry started when he was 30. He had 3 years. So he starts it off knowing like, yeah, time is running out. I'm not going to be here for very long. And I always think it's funny, like the first miracle that he did, this recorded, is that he went to a wedding feast and there were people who had run out of wine. And that his mother comes to him and says, hey, they're out of wine. And his first response is, oh, it's not my time yet. And I'd be like, what is he talking about? What do you mean it's not your time yet? But it's that, again, at that point, wine was also represented by blood. And that he was so alert and aware of what he was going to do in the next 3 years that when she said they're out of wine, he's thinking that they need my blood, and he's going, no, it's not time. Alert. He was even thinking about it in that moment that that's not even what they were talking about. And then he's going in like, you can tell he's just doing it with so much, just like healing people and preaching and pouring into his disciples. Like, guys, you got to get this. Telling them parables over and over a bunch of different ways because he's like, guys, you've got to get it. I'm not going to be here for very long. I know that time's running out. And then he goes to Peter and he's talking to Peter and he's like, hey, it's almost done. And I'm actually going to be delivered into the hands of my enemies. I'm going to be killed. And then Peter's like, no, we're not going to let that happen. And what does he do? He rebukes him and says, oh, Satan, get behind me. Again, I used to always be so confused by that. What does he talk about? Peter was trying to be nice and say like, no, we don't want you to die. Again, he was so alert of what was coming, that he saw something trying to hinder him from that, of like, oh, but we could keep you here a little bit longer. He went, nope, you got to get behind me. That's not the thing. I got to stay focused on what's coming. I've got to stay alert. So he goes to the cross, fulfills all the law and prophets of before, and then he raises back to life. He's like, okay, now, as you're waiting for me to come back, I need you to live the way that I lived, with this constant alertness. Now, he knew that what his end was going to be. Now he's saying, like, but if you have my spirit living inside of you, you're going to be able to now live with the same alertness that I had, not because I'm alert and prepared because I know exactly when it's going to happen. Because if I knew when it was going to happen, I know I would get lazy. Like, I know I would just think, like, oh, if he's coming back in 2050, like, I'm chilling. Right. And I wouldn't do what I needed to do. He's like, no, I'm actually going to make it to where none of you know, because I know that that's what you're going to need in order to, like, every day, daily wake up and do what you need to do. So hopefully this is not, like, scary or throwing you off. I'm hoping that this can be something that can just, again, just be an alert to help us be aware, and that we can start to step into this even more than we are right now with a sense of hope. Of, okay, not time's running out like I was saying with the game and I'm panicking and trying to figure out what to do. Time is running out. What are we going to do to be intentional with the amount of time that we have left? To reach other people, to make sure other people know that time is running out. Like, I'm not going to go and, like, oh man, I know this friend, I really should go and impact them, but I don't know, I'll wait till after the summer. Like, that's the mindset of someone who's thinking, like, I've got all the time in the world. Like, that's just not how it works. Or I think, like, oh, like, I know that my sibling really maybe needs me to say this thing, but I'll wait. Got to be alert and step into these. So I'm going to just give us some extra time to start to think through this. We're going to do some, I'll put some music on, and I want us to just think about the questions that I'll put on there. I'll give us maybe like 3 minutes or something like that to reflect. If you want something to read during that time, like if it's helpful to read chapter 20, Matthew chapter 24, 36 through the end, up until right before this, and it'll give you even more context and some other parables and things of like how to be prepared and alert. So I'm going to give us some time for that, and then we'll do some discussion.